Oh, Kim's on. Great.
There we go. Hey, Drew. Hi, Josh.
How's it going, guys?
How are you?
Great.
I think James wins for the background.
Yeah. That's awesome.
We'll hold on a second here while we get everyone in the meeting.
Just listen to Outlook.
Nice. Welcome, everybody. Oh,
you.
Leo, I like your shirt.
Thanks.
You're a sharp-dressed man. And Mr. Lang supporting the Patriots. Appreciate that, bud.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Sit forward, Johnny.
Yeah.
You need a quarterback.
Yeah. I'm retired. I'm not going back. Nice.
What?
Oh, they're up there in the upper left. All right.
This is pretty funny. I know it's become a thing with all these Zoom calls. You kind of analyze everybody's background, see what's going on. The Tumblesons, looks like you guys are in a pretty good spot. I'm liking that. Well done. Well done.
Is that Betty Jean?
Yep.
Good to
Hey,
see you guys.
how are you?
We're here.
How are you, Tom?
Doing well, doing well. The only problem is that the where you take your bottles to empty them.
Empty bottles.
The empty bottles to dispose of
The
them.
recycle.
They're full. You can't get any more bottles during COVID. It's a problem. Have you guys experienced that problem?
We call it work. It's R&D. We're doing a lot of research and development with wines from around the world, and so when our recycle bin is that full, it's because we've been working extremely hard.
Perfect.
Deduction.
Yeah. Now we actually have one of our friends who's actually here in Walla Walla. He was running around, and he went to one of our other friends, and he went and took all of the recycling from everybody else who also had been drinking quite a bit, and put all the bottles in one deal just to they had an even worse problem than everybody else. But, I think we'll probably just go ahead and start, and then if people join in, they can join. But cheers. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah. Glasses up. It's gonna be fun for us. We're going 08, 14, and 17, and 08 for a long time has been a favorite of ours. It was our second ever vintage, so it's really funny. So I don't know if any of you have ever met my dad, but my dad is this old cowboy. Grew up on a cattle ranch in Ellensburg, Washington, and if you asked him if he knew anything about wine, he would say unequivocally, no, he doesn't know anything about wine. And growing up, they were school teachers. We didn't have good wine around the house. But Dad now turns out actually has a pretty good palate. And so when he comes over, he is very, very eager and willing to drink lots of Doubleback when he comes over to our house. And they look at me like, hey, kid, the wine's actually pretty good. But in like trying all the vintages as he has over time, 2008 has been one of my dad's very favorites. Matter of fact, until 17, I think 2008 was his favorite wine. And Dad, if you don't know anything about wine, you've actually got a pretty good palate, because 2008 is one of our personal favorites as well. A lot of fun.
So we want to make sure that everyone knows that this is for fun. So make sure that I want to see more glasses going up to their face and enjoying the wine. And let's do a quick cheers. It's actually the first one that I think that we've done with our customers.
Yeah,
that's actually everyone zoomed in.
Actually interactive.
Yeah, so cheers. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Cheers.
So we actually have a couple of great customers turned great friends with us today here at the winery too. So I got to give a shout out to Ken and Jennifer Wood with us hanging out at the winery. And Ken had the nerve to run us through a bunch of barrel samples before this. So we're really ready to go for this tasting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had a little bit of wine, so you guys might accidentally get some honesty out of us if you don't want to know the truth. In vino veritas, right?
Yeah.
So I'll jump in and guys, please, we want this one to be really interactive. You know, we've done a few of these where it's just us talking and we're sort of trying this out. So feel free to interrupt or probably more efficiently if you have questions or comments, if you throw them in the comment window, then we can do that without, you know, stepping on everybody. But so 2008, that's what Josh and I are starting with. 2008 was our second vintage. You know, over time, it truly has been one of my personal favorites. I remember there's these magical moments when you start this thing, especially early, right? So the first time with the 2007 that my wife and I got to sit down with a bottle of Doubleback on our table, just the two of us, and we sat and had dinner and we're drinking through the wine and you know, I'm kind of looking around. I was like, "What do you think?" And she goes, "Well, I hope people buy it, but if they don't, we have a lot of wine that I really like to drink." So one of those moments, like, okay, we worked really hard to get to this point, and now we've got wine on the table, and we hope people are actually going to buy wine from us. But if they don't, we really like what we were able to produce and what these guys were able to produce for us. But I remember I had a moment where I was in Montana, and I had a bottle of the 2008. It hadn't been released yet, and it was sitting on the table, and I'm just sitting there. I was actually by myself. You know, sitting at the table, I'm just tasting through the wine, and I remember I texted Chris Figgins, who Josh was working with at the time. You know, Chris is our consulting winemaker for the first 7 years until the protege took over. And I texted Chris, like, "Chris, I think that this 2008 might be one of my favorite wines I've ever had. Like, literally, of all wines, it's one of my favorite wines I've ever had." And he responded and just said, "Yeah, I'm really, really proud of what we did with that wine." And it now has stood the test of time, and it's something that I'm when we don't have very much of it, unfortunately. Matter of fact, I think I only have 2 bottles of 2008 in my own cellar, and they're one of them is number 11, the other one is number 1. So those will come out at a very special time. But really, really, it's cool to have it in the glass again because it's still drinking great. Josh, you want to talk about 08 and why that came together the way it did?
Yeah, for sure. It's fun to think back on. It was my first year in college and working for Chris.
See, he does that just to annoy me, by the way. Just remind me how young he was. Yeah, I just started shaving that year and was most of the way through puberty. And but anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I look like that right now with the lack of a haircut in a long time, so I apologize. But 2008, absolutely incredible vintage. Was at Leonetti full time at the time. 2008 started out really late. I remember actually during spring release at our open house at Leonetti. It was rainy. I don't think had bud break yet. And I remember thinking, when the hell is this vintage going to get into action? And I think it's in those years where you get the best wines. And Drew and I've talked a lot about, you know, just through things that we've been through in the winery. You know, it's those years also that you sit around and talk about the most often. And 2008 was up to the wire the entire way, but we got there perfectly. And in those years, you know, and you think about kind of the years where I wasn't as fond of, like 2015 where it was really hot, or 2009 where we ended up picking because of a frost event. 2008 had everything and it took it to the nth degree. And so there was a ton of color, there was perfect acidity, there was a perfect balance in the wine, great fullness in the wine. And it's just, it's actually, I haven't had this wine in a while. Opening it up tonight, it's aged really well. So 2008s were some of my favorite. I think I made my first 90-point wine in 2008, which was really cool to think back on. But it's also fun to look back on the vineyard sourcings that we used for these early projects. This is mostly Seven Hills and Pepperbridge, kind of the two, what you would say, maybe the staples of the Walla Walla Valley historically. And now, as our estate vineyards have grown, we've actually moved on from that. And Seven Hills and Pepperbridge have gone into our Bledsoe family winery Cabernet. A lot of you might know that as the Flying Bee Cabernet. So Doubleback's gone all estate grown since then, which has been really cool. And then we've kept these exact same blocks and now you get them. It's kind of embarrassing to say, but now you get the same exact wines at, a little bit less money, which is a little bit embarrassing. So it's absolutely incredible juice and fun to think back on in that vintage. So.
Hey, Josh,
Yeah.
why did you pick these 3 vintages?
I think selfishly, they're some of my favorites. And I would say probably the same thing for Drew. 2008, I think, was maybe my favorite wine that Chris made for Doubleback, and 14 was my first vintage, and then 17 is just an easy comparison of what we're doing right now. So,
Okay,
Josh, it's you've got the 17 is very similar to the 2008 from a proportioning standpoint.
yeah, that's
Right.
a good catch. That's a good catch. I hadn't thought about that until now, but it certainly is, and actually somewhat similar vintages too.
Yeah, it's 1% difference in Petit Verdot, and the extra percent went into Cab Sauvignon.
Yeah, there's very similar vintages, and 2017 was technically hotter, but I remember going into Labor Day for about 10 days, we had these smoke clouds high up in the air that actually covered the valley. When we'd get these temperature forecasts of about 104, 105, the valley would really only get up into the mid 80s, and so we actually extended our growing season, much like 2008, to kind of replicate that vintage in a lot of ways. And so we actually got, I would say the same thing for 2017. We got great color, great acidity, and really great balance of texture in the wines. So good catch there.
Josh saw the temperature forecasts coming in, so we went and committed arson and started some forest fires to make sure we had some nice smoke cover. It's just one more way that he just takes everything to the nth degree to make great wine. Sometimes you got to commit a crime to make good wine. And so, good job on that. I'm glad you didn't get caught.
Thanks.
Well,
No pain, no gain.
yeah. It's been a fun project, and for us, every once in a while we get to do one of these kind of mini vertical tastings. And I remember when we started Doubleback, one of the questions that I got frequently was, how are these wines going to age? And so I would ask Chris the same questions. Like, hey, Chris, what do I say when people ask me that? And well, the simple answer is you don't know because they haven't aged yet. But in general, one of the things that is at the core of everything that we do and everything that Josh and Joe and the team try to make for us is balance. And what Chris's response at that time was, I think these wines are going to age fantastically because they're in balance. Now, if you have a wine that has too much fruit or too much alcohol or too much tannin or anything is out of balance, then that can start to dominate as the wine ages. But if the wines are in balance, then they're just going to integrate and get better and better as they age. And that balance is really going to shine through. And that's what we're getting now in the 2008. And it's crazy to me to think that those 12 years ago. But these wines are really starting to age just fantastically. And I think this one's still got a lot of life left in it, which is kind of cool.
Sure.
It's like, and so I think it's going to, just going to continue to age. And I think the rest of the wines that we're making currently and off into the future, let's be honest, we don't want you to sit on them forever. We actually want you to drink these wines. And so they are approachable as young wines, but they are wines that now we can now say with proof that they will age very, very well. And that's cool to be able to show. We felt like that was going to be the case, but now we can actually prove it, which is really fun.
Yeah. And I think one of the most exciting things for me as a winemaker to drink aged wines is aromatically, this wine totally is developing that cigar box, that cedar note, really mature fruit. And, going back to what Drew said, if things aren't in balance, they won't be in balance when they age either. And so, if you had a lot of alcohol in this wine and 12 years later, drinking it, it's still going to have a lot of alcohol. And, getting to enjoy this wine as it sits right now, it's really in a great shape. And it's still got easy 15, 20 years on it. So pretty fun to look back into the future. And I actually didn't know this. I thought 2009 was the first year that we used LaFour Vineyard, but 2008 actually was. So I was actually out there today looking at our cab blocks, going through bloom right now, and things look really great. And so excited to continue that thread through all three of these wines.
So Drew, do you have a plan for when you're going to drink bottle 11s?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't currently. I don't know. It's going to be like some sort of monumental event. Although we do have a 25th wedding anniversary coming up next year, so maybe we'll just go drink through a handful of the early number 11 bottles on our 25th wedding anniversary. Seems like a reasonable excuse. I'll check with the boss and see if she says that's okay. Yeah, no, I don't know. There's some wines like we, across the board, both what we make and what we collect. We make wine and we buy wine with the plan to consume it. And we're just not collecting trophies. We actually, when we make wine, we ultimately want people to consume the wine. I do have a handful of bottles though that are just trophies that may live forever. And so those number 11s, they may just live forever and never get cracked and just sort of be trophies. While fundamentally I disagree with that concept of having trophy bottles of wine, because that's not why they exist. They're supposed to be consumed. Having a handful of trophies that just sit in the cellar forever may be the case. And those 11s may end up being just trophies forever and ever. So I just poured us both a little glass of a little taste of 2014. So 2014 was a pretty monumental year in our business. It was the first year that Josh took over as the lead winemaker in making Doubleback. And we're how old?
26. 26
years old, and he's stepping into some very big shoes, figuratively, not literally. Chris is not that. But he's stepping into some very big shoes from a winemaking standpoint, taking over for Chris Figgins, who is, still a great friend, one of the great winemakers in the world. Has been making Leonetti for a long time, makes Figgins Estate, makes Toil Pinot down and there's some really big shoes to fill. I mean, it's a big deal. And I know he felt a lot of pressure stepping into that role and taking over for Chris. And when the wine was released, now, trust me, the critics piss us off all the time. And so I never feel like they give us scores that these guys deserve for the wines they make for us. But it just so happens in 2014, first time Josh's name is on the bottle, we got the highest ratings we'd ever received from the critics. And by the way, I happen to agree. Like this 2014, it was his first vintage. And it was a big deal, like, hey, look, this is like he's stepping into a big role, and he's got stepped up and made this 2014. And sometimes the critics get it right. I do think at that point it was the best wine we had made, but it was cool. I mean, it was a big moment for you when those scores hit. I know it was, and so cheers to you. Good job, dude.
Robert Parker gave him a 97, didn't he?
Did, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so 2014, exactly like Drew said, it was
so pretty.
As an assistant winemaker, you always think you're ready. And Joe's actually sitting right next to me, so you got to watch what I say here. But, you always think you're ready to go out there. And then when and I grew up in Walla Walla, I idolized Gary Figgins. He was the hero and true American dream story, and what he did with Leonetti was absolutely incredible. And, when you get to step into that position, it was a big deal. I was a wine geek at heart. And, I was working for Drew Bledsoe, this mythical creature of an individual that every young boy in Walla Walla aspired to be. And, my football career, I still am bitter about. But that being said, it wasn't an easy position, but it was something that I really wanted and something that I had to instill confidence in myself. And so it was really fun to get out into this. This was actually the hottest at the time. It was the warmest vintage on record in Washington State until 2015 came along. And 14 to me, even though it was so hot, continued to keep its balance and richness. And that was really important. Sometimes in 15, I felt like the wines got thin and a little bit out of balance. But 14 was just a really great vintage. We got a really extended growing season during harvest, which I've always felt has been kind of that key decision factor in if the vintage is going to be good or not. And it was, one of those times where we really leaned on McQueen Vineyard, our original estate site, and then LaFour, the yin and the yang of our vineyard portfolio. So McQueen being all tannin and acid, and LaFour being all, lush, plush fruit and high pH wines. And it was really cool. It was actually, I was just thinking about it. Joe and a few of our team members and I, we were actually building this winery at the time. It was, I was waiting, on nails and on edge for those scores to come out, because I think it was the first report on my own wines. And we were actually climbing up a ladder on this floor behind us. There was no building yet. It was just a foundation, and the cellar floor had just been poured concrete when I got the email. And I think it was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. And for the record, I hate scores too. I do not make wine for scores and never will, but there is a part of you, I think, that will always appreciate some affirmation of what you're doing. And so it was a big weight off my shoulders at the time, but since then we've actually broken that record with the 2017 vintage. So kind of fun to go back to that. But
continuing to get better. So we got one question about, hold on. We got one question that popped up from Kenneth about when should you start drinking these wines? I'll comment and then I'll let Josh go. One of the things that I appreciate about Josh and what Joe and what the team do is they make wines for us that actually are really approachable as young wines. And I'll let Josh talk about how that happens. So, if you have a 17, we just recommend you open it a couple hours in advance. But the wines are really approachable as young wines. They're not like, some of the stuff you might find in Bordeaux where you got to give it a decade or 20 years before they're approachable. They're actually approachable as young wines. We tell people, just as sort of a blanket statement, that 5 years from vintage date is a good window when they're going to start to hit their peak. I found with some of the wines, like 2009, for example, it was not a vintage that the critics liked very much. And, the 09, when we first, excuse me, it's not the COVID, I promise, allergies. But 2009, for example, when we released it, it was sort of just this voluptuous, fruit-forward wine that I really didn't feel like was going to, based on my past experience, didn't feel like it was going to be a really age-worthy wine. But now that 2009 is really starting to show as it's gained some age. It's integrated and developed more complexity, and it's not just this simple fruit-forward one-note wine. So as a general guideline, go with 5 years from vintage date. But I also tell people, hopefully you buy more than one bottle, and I recommend that you try one every now and then. And then if it's drinking good, drink the rest of them. That's what we do in our cellar. Like, hey, that's drinking great. Let's drink it. Because like I say, these are not designed. These are not designed to be trophies. They're designed to be consumed and shared with family and friends. And hopefully for a special event, which we also discovered during quarantine, when you're stuck in your house. Dinner is a big event, every day. I don't know if it's been that way for you guys, but for us, like, start at 11 o'clock. Like, all right, what are we gonna have for dinner? And if you're gonna plan for dinner all day, then all of a sudden dinner on Tuesday is a big event. And so, we've been cracking some pretty special bottles at our house in the middle of the week, and it's that part's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, kind of graduates. Like maybe I'll have some Beaujolais. Oh well, 2 o'clock hits. Maybe I'll have some good Italian wine, but then you end up at Doubleback later down the road, and it kind of escalates from there. So it's been a good excuse to open some good bottles of wine for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Catherine's asking, how many do most people quote unquote save for a vintage? I have the same problem. I have a hard time saving wine. If there's something that I really like, we generally just drink it. My personal strategy is I hide it from myself. In our cellar, there's like a little dark little corner back there, and I'll put boxes back there and stack other boxes on them and just hide it back there. Cause no, I know that's going to be better in 10 years. So I'm just gonna, out of sight, out of mind. If I can't reach it, then I'm not going to open it. But I will tell you that, I continuously, when I come to Walla Walla, I continuously have to put wine in my truck because we go through our own stuff. You're not supposed to get high on your own supply. I mean, that's sort of the old deal. But we do like to drink our own wine, and we're continuously depleting. And thankfully, these guys continue to make more. But it is hard to save them. You have to have a strategy if you're going to save them for a while. My strategy is hiding it for myself.
And I'd say too, like there's never a bad time to open a good bottle of wine. And so if you're ever in that, cheers to that. If you're ever into that moment, just you're on the fence, should I open this or not? Just open it, because I've never, I think it was Barbara Bush that said, you'll never regret spending time with family and friends. It's just like, good wine. You'll never regret opening a good bottle. I've regretted opening a few bad bottles, but if you have a good bottle of wine that you're on the fence about, just open it and enjoy it. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind.
It's sort of interesting because it's sort of the opposite. Like, when you say that, if you wait for a special event to open a special bottle of wine, well, instead opening a special bottle of wine can become the event. And we've done that a little bit at our house, and it's really been kind of cool. I'm like, oh, you know what? Yeah, we're just gonna crack that, and that wine is gonna be the event. And in most cases, the wine has lived up to the billing and made it a very good event.
I'll drink to that.
There you go. I love it. I love it.
So somebody asked, I believe the 2014 was 100% Cab. Are there others that are 100% Cabernet? There aren't really. Especially I think in Washington State, 100% Cab is an anomaly. We really believe in blending Merlot, Petit Verdot, Malbec, and just recently Cabernet Franc coming out next year. You guys will see that, but it's something that it's a tool on your belt that we really use to balance out and find that elegance and find that Doubleback signature that I think that we've come to be known for. And so it's kind of a point of focus for us to blend and use those varietals to enhance the wine.
Josh, my question was, is the 2014 100% Cab?
It's not. I think it's 89% Cab. There's a good amount of Merlot, mostly Petit Verdot in there, and then a little bit of Merlot and Malbec.
Yeah, I thought Robert Parker had said it was 100% Cab, so maybe he didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah, weird. Those critics don't know what they're talking about. It's such a strange thing.
Now our blending process is really it's exactly this scientific. Josh and Joe put together different blends, and then we sit down, the four of us with my wife, and we taste through them and figure out which one we like the best, and that's what goes into the bottle. And it's exactly that scientific. There's never any sort of other guiding principle in terms of we need to make all Cab, or we need to use Merlot, or we need to use it, which is sit down. And the only thing that does guide us, in order to call it Cabernet, we have to be 75% Cab. But beyond that, it's simply, if 100% Cabernet was the best wine we could make for that vintage, it would be 100% Cabernet. But we really feel like the other varietals give us complexity, depth, sometimes aromatics, sometimes mouthfeel. There are a lot of components to it that we like. But if we ever try a wine that's 100% Cabernet, and that's the best wine we can make that year, that's what we'll make.
Yeah, 100%.
And then we'll figure out what to do with the other stuff.
Let's go. Did you pour the 17 already?
I haven't poured the 17 yet.
Oh, okay.
How many blends do you guys sample before you make that decision? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 30?
I think we might have sampled 30 today.
So my part of the process and my wife's part of the process, you know, we have such great trust in these guys that my wife and I will probably, with Doubleback, for example, we'll probably participate in 2 or 3 rounds of blending trials. But these guys are watching these wines, you know, all the way through the process and have a really good idea of, you know, what's what and what's maybe going to make the blend. And so generally what they'll do is they'll have a clear idea of what's going to make up probably, I don't know, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the wine really early, you know, like, okay, this is going to be the base blend. And then they'll use that base blend and then start to bring in, you know, other components. And that's where Mara and I get to participate in that last, it's really, really hard work, by the way. It's like laying asphalt. You know, you got to sit down and you have to taste through all these amazing wines and try to figure out which one's the final blend. The struggle is real, guys. I want you to feel sorry for me. We're gonna have a fundraiser for Drew and Mara for all this hard work we have to put in to taste through these delicious wines. But on a serious note, it's actually really difficult, and that's true. It's really difficult because so if we sit down with 5 or 6 blends, every single one of them is fantastic, and every single one of them is something we would be proud to have our name attached to. But we have to go through and pick the one that we think is the best of all of these wines. And so a lot of times it requires multiple passes. And one thing we have determined is that we have to do it for Mara and myself. There can be no exterior input. I can't sit next to him or next to Joe, and because the simplest little nonverbal clue, like if Josh tries one and he goes, like, oh, Josh likes that one, I guess I should like that one. And so you have to like remove any extraneous input. And then the other thing that we'll do is we'll go through a round on Wednesday, and then we'll let the wines rest, and then we'll go through them again on Wednesday, and then we'll let them rest, and we'll go through them again on Thursday, because they do change over time. But it is really splitting hairs in a really cool way to try to determine what is the ultimate blend. And when there are no wrong answers, it's really hard to figure out what's the very best one.
How soon do you start that before you guys actually bottle?
It's right during harvest. So we have 160 acres of property now that we manage through 4 different vineyard sites, and then all of our contracted vineyard sites too. And it's right away. Right when it gets into the fermenter, we'll go through a cold soak, and and really on the sorting table, we'll start to get a better understanding of what does this, what do these grapes look like? What do they taste like? When you have the grape in your hand and you're chewing the skins and the seeds, and you're starting to understand and formulate a plan of extraction in the fermenter, and that's really when it starts. And so you end up with this very long Excel spreadsheet of different lots of LaFour West Cab -1 and the second picking of that same block, and the amount of variables that you have starts at a very large scale. But then you inevitably, you just work from the obvious, right? So you say, obviously these, 10 lots are going to work together. So Joe, I want you to blend these lots together in the first racking in January, February, March. And that'll kind of start to simplify that process for us. And so we really just work through a process of elimination. And then when we get into the actual blending trials, maybe we'll go through 7 or 8 rounds of those, depending on the vintage. And I think, usually during blending trials, we're probably around 15 to 20 lots at that time for Doubleback Cab that we're looking at and trying to eliminate or add. And so you start with maybe a couple hundred lots and narrow that down into 20.
Who makes the final call? Is it Drew or you, Josh? Who makes the final call?
Mara.
Mara?
Smart man.
What has generally happened, and this is
Smart man.
she's got the good palate in the family. It's not because I'm trying to suck up to my wife. She's not here, but I would say that if she was listening. But she actually really does have a great palate. But what has almost always happened every time we've done it is we've been able to narrow it down to two. Like there's generally a consensus on it's either this one or that one. And then we just look at Mara and she points to one and like, okay, that's what's going in. And but it's sort of interesting after we go through all of it. I think that's been pretty much the way it's fallen every time we've done it. We have 5 or 6 blends. There's generally a consensus on a top 2, and then Mara gets the final vote on those, and she's got a good palate. She wouldn't tell you that; she'd be embarrassed to hear me say that, but she actually does have a really great palate.
Yeah, and even like in this year when we did our blending trials, it was 2018. Honestly, turning out to be one of my favorite vintages ever. Well, we had like 4 blends, and we were almost like, just throw a dart and pick one because every single one of these blends is so good. The quality is so high that we could be really proud of any one of these blends. So we've been really fortunate enough to have great years and a good string of vintages.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody asked, do you use all the same brand barrels or do you use a combination of different barrels? We actually use a pretty good combination. Over the years, we've learned quite a bit about our coopers that we use over in France. And we've narrowed it down to about 8 different cooperages that we use for the bulk of Doubleback. And I think 3 of those cooperages make up the majority of it. And then the other 4 or 5 really make up some small percentages. But I've been really happy with who we've picked. And for the first time ever, we were just tasting this lot too, is we have a little bit of concrete, aging Cabernet and concrete for the first time ever for Doubleback. So I feel like we're a little bit of a pioneer in that regard in Washington State, but really, we've really enjoyed what that's done to the wines up here. And I think going back to that, it's all about the vision that Drew set out at the beginning and of Doubleback is, making that elegant, balanced style of Cabernet and concrete. And the cooperages that we picked have certainly tried to exhibit that vision. So it's been an important decision.
We're really blessed in Walla Walla. We have amazing fruit, and we always feel like and that the fruit should be the star of the show. It shouldn't be a bunch of oak input. It shouldn't be it's these guys make 1,000 decisions through the course of a vintage and a winemaking process, but we're blessed with amazing fruit. And so you start there, and then you let the fruit be the star of the show. And so the oak, Greg Harrington said one time, I plagiarize all my bullshit, by the way. But Greg Harrington, he said that the oak should be the frame and not the art. And that's how we view oak in the winemaking process. But the fruit is always the star of the show, and concrete is actually really allowing that to even be more so. So I've got one of the questions is whether our kids want to get into the wine business. My son Stu is about to graduate. We're heading down in a couple weeks. He was supposed to have a graduation ceremony at Cal Poly from their wine business program. When he signed up for that, Josh, he goes, "Should I start getting my resume together? How's this going to work?" But he's going to graduate with a wine business degree. He is very interested in the business. He's not qualified to work for us yet, but we'll see if Josh wants to hire him down the road. And then we'll see with the other kids. The other kids don't seem to have the wine bug quite yet, although now that they're in college, they certainly do like drinking a lot of wine, which is really expensive. But we set this thing up. It's when you start a wine business, there's sort of like at the start, there's this idea that's going to be a generational business. I don't know if that will be the case or not, but we're not building it that way. We're just trying to build the best business we can. And if the kids decide they want to come back and work for us, then they can apply for a job. But they're going to start at the very, very bottom, and they're going to work not for Joe, they're going to work for CJ and do whatever CJ wants them to do, mopping floors, cleaning toilets, whatever. And then if they show some promise, then maybe they can get a job for us full time. But they got to earn it. It's they're not going to be handed anything. I wasn't handed anything. Josh wasn't handed anything, and my kids certainly are not going to be handed anything. They have to earn some stuff.
It's actually I do a little bragging on Drew right now, but it was actually one of the moments when I was working for Figgin still. I think you guys were heading up to Pullman for the weekend, and you brought the kids with you. We were packing boxes back in the glory days, and all four of the kids jumped right in, never complained, and worked for a good amount of time. And it was one of those times when I was like, all right, this is what the Bledsoe family's like. So it's they're all great kids, and we'd be happy to have any one of them.
So one of the questions was the background on Bledsoe Family Winery and how that came to be. So and I'll be as concise as I can be on this. So the inception of that brand actually was a Gary Figgins story. So I came to Walla Walla, and I was staying at Leonetti, and I was staying out. They have a studio apartment out in the back, and I was out there. Chris was out of town, but Gary came out to have a glass of wine, and so he went out in the back closet in the studio apartment, and he pulled out this blank bottle of wine, and he brought it out, and he opened it, and I said, "What's that?" He goes, "It's just a family wine." I'm like, "Oh, that's really cool." He's like, "Yeah, this is stuff that didn't quite make it into Leonetti, and obviously it was still fantastic juice." And we sat there and drank that. And I was like, "Okay, well, I think if people knew that you could buy a blank bottle of Leonetti's extra juice that nobody else could get, doesn't have a label on it, like, okay, well, that's the coolest friggin' thing that you guys make, and this is what you guys drink as a family." And so when we started Doubleback, there was a lot of wine that didn't make the cut. So we would bring blank bottles home. We would give them to the kids' teachers, if they needed their grades a little bumped. And but we after a little while, we would have these bottles in the house, and our friends would come over and they wanted some. I'm like, well, I mean, you gotta pay me a little something. I mean, still, So anyway, but Mara and I were sitting, and we pulled the cork on it was probably an 08 or 09, family wine, and we're just drinking at the table. Like, man, this is actually really good wine. We should maybe not just be bulking this off or giving it away for free. And so we formed a brand around a second red wine. The bottle is another story that relates to my wife, and she has all the best ideas in the family. But then Josh actually came to me with the idea, like, well, what if we started another label around this that was actually a serious business? And so we did that, and it's given us a venue to introduce new and different wines, different varietals, different brands, rosé, Chardonnay, with the Syrahs under Bledsoe family. And it's allowed us to make wines that are price-wise in reach of more people. And also we're able to, experiment and play around with other varietals. Doubleback will always be Cabernet. We're trying to make the best expression of Cabernet that we can make from the Walla Walla Valley. We do the Estate Reserve, which is also a Cabernet-based blend. We did a little bit of Merlot this year. We did a little bit of Chardonnay, but it's always, at its core, is always going to be based on making the best Cabernet we can make from the Walla Walla Valley. In Bledsoe family, we get to play around a little more. We get to have more fun. We're trying to kind of come up with sort of how we put that brand out there. One of my friends, he goes, "Why don't you call it the winemaker's sandbox?" And that's where Josh gets to go play around. But it's been really successful for us. It's sort of like where we try to introduce the younger generation to wine and start to educate people on wine, with the hopes that eventually they graduate up to Doubleback. And that's actually happening, which is great. That's as short as I can say it. That's the story behind Bledsoe family.
And the cool thing I'd just add is it's made Doubleback better, and the inception of what the family wine was at Leonetti. And I'll, confirm that was a real thing. We used to just write with a Sharpie family wine on the boxes. And it's just allowed us to be more selective in Doubleback. And because of that, because Doubleback is trying to be the best Cabernet that we can make from the Walla Walla Valley, you can only make such a large amount of it, which isn't very much. And so we have to have an outlet for that. And so Doubleback's just been this incredible project in large part because of Bledsoe Family Winery. And so it's been cool to bring quality to both scales and also enhance both projects. So it's been a lot of fun.
So next question is on the 18 vintage. So the cool thing is, so the family wine, because we're talking about family wine, so the family wine, it comes as 1.5 liters. We've been, now that we're open again in Bend, thank you. And even prior to that, we've been pouring the family wine at the wine bar. And I was actually just saying downstairs in the cellar that when I pour that for people, I like to get it in the glass before I tell the story. Because the 18 family wine, it's really fantastic juice. It's exceptional wine, but it's technically the lowest red wine that we make, right? It's like we blend the State Reserve and then the Doubleback and then the Bledsoe family cab, and then and then whatever's left goes in the family wine. But that's not a great sales story, right? You know, like, oh, this is our leftover stuff, you know. But once people have it in the glass, they're like, wow, this is amazing. And this is like the 4th, you know, Cabernet-based wine that you make. Like, yeah, that's how good everything is that's in the building now, is that our leftover juice, which is our family wine, is this good. And so with the 2018, we've been able to introduce people to the 2018 vintage early with the family wine. And it's great juice. I've actually had the conversation with Josh a couple of different times, like, dude, don't make it too good. We still want people to buy in Doubleback, right? Like, you know, like, don't screw up our business model by making the family wine, you know, too good where people don't get. But it's really fun to be able to have a preview of the 18 vintage and have it be that exceptional. It's not something that we like to tell very often, but in the family wine, there's a pretty good percentage of pressed juice. So when you bring grapes in and they ferment and then you press the juice off, it's like primarily it's free run. It's just gravity, and then the bladder starts to fill up and give it a little pressure, and then these guys, as it's coming out, they taste that there's too much tannin from too much skin contact, and they stop. But once you start to press it, that's generally the juice that doesn't really make the blends. But a lot of the 18 family wine is pressed juice, and it's still fantastic. And so it's just really the feather in the cap of the entire team, from the vineyard through the winery, that the family wine, there's literally no bad wine that comes out of this building now. And it's really cool to be able to say that. Like, there's no stuff that we got to go bulk off anymore. We're really proud of every piece of it.
Yeah, I remember during 2018, Drew and I were actually, I think it was Bledsoe McDaniels. We were on the phone a lot, working through what we should do, how we should do it. You know, working with, it was kind of going a different direction at the first, you know, kind of discussions about it. And I remember, you know, Drew had asked me, you know, what's the weather like up there? How are things looking? How's the vintage doing? And all September it was 80 degrees and sunny. It was perfect, you know. And
Right.
All September is the exact same answer. And then October came, and Drew had asked, you know, what's the weather like? How's the vintage looking? It's instead of 80 degrees and sunny, it's 70 degrees and sunny. And it was just the absolute, you know, I said this earlier, is that it's the harvest weather that really dictates so much about the quality of the vintage. And 18 was just, I think, easily one of the best vintages I've ever seen during harvest, and such a pleasure to make wine from. We had, you know, like I said, you know, we could have thrown a dart and picked a blend and made an incredible wine. But, you know, obviously, like we've always done, we took it to the nth degree and tried to make the best wine that we can. But 2018, I think you can expect a lot of. The biggest difference to me is the mouthfeel and just the chewiness of the tannins, and just the, you know, the pleasure factor there. They're just really ultra pleasing. Everything that you can think of, acid, tannin, balance, elegance, everything is there. And the wines are just absolutely incredible. So I'm really excited about that.
What Josh is trying to say is he's got no excuses. It better be amazing, otherwise he's fired. Yeah, right. So somebody want to hear the story about Brady in the golf match with the purple feet. So the story was, it goes back a little farther. So Chris Palmer was our quarterback coach in New England back in the day, and he's about 5'4", and so we just made fun of him all the time for being little, especially in a football setting, you know. And he kept warning us, like, you guys better stop messing with me because, you know, I'm a little older than you. I know things. Turns out he had a friend in the FBI, and the FBI guys, if there's ransom money or money they think is going to be stolen, they have this powder that they can put that you can't see until it gets any moisture. And once it gets any moisture, then it turns purple, and its dye and whatever it comes in contact with it's going to be purple for at least 2 or 3 weeks. And so Chris came in, and he went in and he went into our lockers, and he filled our socks full of this FBI dye. And so we put our socks on, we went to practice, we came back after and pulled our socks off, and our feet were totally purple, and it wouldn't come out for weeks. And so when Brady got there, we loved him, and just, he's a great guy, in spite of the fact that he took my job and super disrespectful. He's really a good dude, but we liked him a lot. But we decided that we had to mess with him. And so we did that to him. We filled his socks full of the FBI dye, and his feet turned purple. The sad part of that story, and then we'll get back to wine, is that dye also made it down to the New York Giants. And there was this offensive lineman that played for the Giants. Giant dude, bald, completely bald, white guy, completely bald, looked like Mr. Clean. And so they decided they were going to mess with him, and they put the dye in his gloves.
Ooh.
On the way out to practice, he took his gloves and he threw them in his helmet. Well, the dye came out, and he's bald. And so he's going out to practice, and he put his helmet on. So he looked like Mikhail Gorbachev for like 3 weeks. He had this big purple mark on top of his head, and couldn't get it out for 3 weeks. I think Tommy said during that broadcast, he goes, what I learned really quickly was if you're gonna start that game, don't mess with the guy with the biggest wallet, because they've got stuff. And I know that he paid it forward and messed with some rookies as he got older as well.
That's got to happen in the winery, I think.
Yeah, right. Yeah, at some point.
Joe just left, so Joe might be getting some purple socks, or maybe it is muck boots for the cleaning his tanks, something like that.
So one of the questions was, are the Bledsoe family wines better to drink now, or should we lay them down? I would say in general, with the exception of maybe the Cab and the Syrah, they're designed to drink early. The Bledsoe, the family wine, it comes in a clear bottle. One of the things we tell people is that clear bottle, one of the reasons that red wines go into dark glass is it protects from UV radiation, which breaks down the wine. And those clear bottles, they need to stay in the box, or you got to drink them because you don't have the UV protection. Rosé, obviously, you buy it, you go outside and you drink it. There's some rosé right there. Same with the Chardonnay. Although the Chardonnay will actually age, but we don't recommend that. But in general, with the exception of previously has been the Flying Bee Cabernet. Now it's just going to be Bledsoe Family Cabernet, and the Stolen Horse Syrah. We recommend that if you buy those wines, go ahead and crack them.
Yeah. And on the Stolen Horse, somebody also asked, how does that fit into the brand? How do you decide to declare a vintage? I would actually say that Stolen Horse might be like the trademark or the hallmark wine of Bledsoe Family Winery. Is the first wine that we made for Bledsoe Family Winery back in 2009, and a huge, almost cult-like following for that wine. We can't make enough of that wine. The 2018 that we just bottled, I think, might be easily, like I said, it's just that vintage, the best vintage we've made. And Stolen Horse has certainly, fit and come into its own in this project. And so, how does it fit into the brand? I think it leads the brand, and certainly is just something that people come back for. And it's so surprising that it's literally a cult-like following for that wine.
Yeah, it was funny when we decided to make the Syrah. I went to Chris initially and like, hey, we've got some Syrah planted at this the first vineyard we planted. Just long story, but Chris goes, I'm not making Syrah. Anybody can make Syrah. And so I went back to him and said, well, we're going to make some Syrah. Do you want to do it, or you want me to check with Greg Harrington or Christoph and see if they want to make it? And he folded like a cheap tent and made us the 09 Syrah. Made 100 cases. We were only going to make it one time, but the response was so strong that we had to bring it back in 2012, and now it's a staple, and it's part of the inception of the Bledsoe McDaniels project that we're starting. There are not nearly as many Syrah fanatics as there are Cabernet and Chardonnay and so on, but the people people that are fanatic about Syrah are really fanatic about it. So with Stolen Horses sort of a base, now we're going to do some really cool single vineyard. Any of you that have had that were lucky enough to lay hands on some of the LaFour Syrah that we released last year under our white label project, understand that it's really special and really unique stuff. And it also changed my perception of what Syrah is.
Yeah.
You know, I started the first Syrahs I ever had were these Australian Shirazes, that these just inky dark wines so you can eat with a fork. Turns out like Syrah in the old world and Syrah, the way that we're trying to do it, and the way that I think some people that we really like make it in Walla Walla, is actually not that. It's actually a wine of elegance. You know, it's not, if it's done super overripe, then it becomes, then it turns into that Shiraz style. But the way that we're trying to do it, it's a really nuanced wine, which is really fun.
Yeah, and I grew up on that same foot as Chris. You know, Chris used to say, you know, Syrah's easy, Syrah's this, that. It's easy to grow, it's easy to make. You know, there's that joke like Syrah's the wheat of the West, and it really is. It's actually very vigorous, you know, very easy to basically grow, but it's really hard to make really great. And I think it's that natural progression in your winemaking and maybe wine drinking career, you know, because I think for both Drew and I, Cabernet will always be at the heart of what we do. And I think, you know, Cabernet, I joke a lot, Cabernet's in my blood. And, but Syrah, it's such a cool extenuation of wine for us. And being here in Walla Walla, there's such a diverse valley. You know, Syrah is almost like the Pinot Noir of Walla Walla. So it shows its site really well, shows where it's grown. And Walla Walla being so diverse, we can have, you know, multiple different crazy examples of what it's like. And, you know, in Doubleback, you know, we have, you know, and being able to grow up at Leonetti, we had, you know, 5 different estate vineyards. And even in Cabernet, when you really geek out on wine, you really get geeky, Cabernet shows off site variation really well, but it's not as obvious as Syrah is. And so, you know, how do we, you know, continue to make a first growth kind of style Cabernet, but also, you know, make this Syrah and get into the Syrah project and show off vineyard differences. And so we do it through these single vineyard Syrah projects, and it's been really fun. So I don't actually think we talked about the 2017. I think it's all the barrel samples that we drank with Ken earlier today, but we kind of skipped over that. But 2017, this was absolutely another great year. I already talked about the vintage a little bit. I think Lee mentioned it earlier. The blend is really similar to the 2008, and it's just an incredible wine. This is what was that? Sorry, God, get out of here. And so 2017, we've just been really blessed with. The cool thing, I think, from 2008 to what we're tasting right now in 2017 is to see the progression. No, he's not. No, he's not. Yeah.
Hey Tracy, that's trouble. That's trouble.
Hide that, Hope. Hide that.
Let's be honest. I just work here. I'm not the boss around here. As a matter of fact, I'm sort of annoying when I show up, so I try to be gone.
I lost my whole train of thought.
Yeah,
But
we, sorry, I had to leave for a second. As I've gotten older, I have to wear beaters now, and I have to pee like every 7 minutes. And these guys make fun of me, and especially Casey. She's really relentless. She's on thin ice around here. But yeah, sorry, I had to pee. Anyway, the 17.
I know you're paying.
So attaboy, Jeff. We oh man, the 2008 going to the 2017. The cool big difference is that the 2017 is almost all estate grown, and so that's you know, when Drew retired from the NFL, bought a piece of property, it was McQueen Vineyard, and to flash forward all these years into 2017, it's our 11th vintage in bottle. It's really, I think, fun, very rewarding, and very inspiring for the future to see that the estate vineyards that we picked out and developed along the last almost 2 decades have been what's made up the entire blend. Because like Drew talked earlier, that blending process is done through a complete, honest, and pure authentic way of doing things. So that's the big differentiator here, and I can't wait. You know, I wish at the same time, you know, you could have a wine that you just released and age it, you know, 10 years and see what the age would be like, because it would be really cool to see the 10-year difference in these two wines at the same time.
It's one of the people ask what the biggest differences are between my previous job and being in the wine business. And in my previous job, I knew instantly whether I made a good decision or a bad decision. You know, if my guy caught the ball, good decision. If their guy caught the ball, bad decision. In wine, a lot of times you got to wait like a decade before you know the full implications of the decisions you make. Thankfully, I've been able to have really smart, experienced people around to help inform these decisions, and so far, you know, they've been good decisions, and we hope that continues to be the case. So we had a question about the vineyards right here at the winery at Flying Bee Vineyard, and what we intend to do with those. Well, we're when we bought this property, and there's a longer story behind this, but it's full hats off to Josh for discovering and bringing us to this property. But we had already closed on the property, and we were starting to build the winery. And turns out the adjacent vineyard right next door was Charles Smith's Powerline Vineyard, and his inaugural vintage from that vineyard was Wine Spectator's #2 wine in the world. So our next door neighbor made the #2 wine in the world. We were glad that we closed on the property before that rating hit. Otherwise, our property would have been a lot more expensive. And so our plan with the Syrah that comes off of this vineyard is eventually for that to be one of the 3 Syrahs that goes into Bledsoe McDaniels. So we've got the LaFour Vineyard Syrah on the rocks. We've planted some Syrah up at McQueen Vineyard, and then we have Syrah planted here with the idea that they're really separate and distinct sites. I'm not going to make a ton of Syrah from each of the sites, which is going to be really small production, kind of geeky Syrah. But we think they're really unique sites. They're going to make really unique wines. And so that's the plan with that. And then whatever we decide not to, you know, put into those, we'll go into Stolen Horse is the plan for the Syrah here.
And we actually have an acre of Merlot right out the winery door here that I think could have big potential for Doubleback blending. We harvested it for the first time last fall, and so it's a little bit of a, you know, there's a lot of Merlot planted out by McQueen where it's warmer, and the wines out there are kind of thin, you know, Seven Hills Vineyard and Merlot. So Merlot's an early ripening grape, so a lot of those wines are a little bit thin, a little bit boring to me. And so if we could get these Merlots planted on these heavier soils and a little bit colder, a little bit later ripening sites, I think this Merlot has a lot of potential to make the Doubleback blend down the road. So it's a really cool, you know, piece of the portfolio into making that first growth style Doubleback. Yeah. So somebody asked, I'm curious on this, in the Wine Spectator January issue, Drew mentioned enjoying wine with some of the former Pats players, wondering who were the wine fans and what did you all drink together? And were there any good stories from those nights? And I will admit that I got to go back to Boston with Drew back in September last year for the home opener, which was awesome experience, you know, especially as a young sports fan growing up. I had to brag to all my buddies about it. But there was some really good stories that came out late at night with a couple of ex-players. So I'm curious. Some of them probably won't make the PG rating here, but there's some good stuff. So I'm curious to hear.
I'll try to keep it at least PG-13. But so surprisingly, when we were back there, not surprisingly, the quarterbacks were, you know, wine guys, you know, because we're very sophisticated, intelligent, worldly as quarterbacks. But surprisingly, there were a lot of the linebackers were the guys that would come over and drink wine, like Ted Johnson, Teddy Bruschi, Vrabel, and then Bruce Armstrong was my left tackle, is a big wine guy. And so these guys would come over, and so they'd bring wine, and it was sort of a formative moment in the foundation of Doubleback, and then we'd do blind tastings with these wines, and they'd bring Bordeaux and Napa and all that, and I'd bring Walla Walla, and we would kick their ass. And it was cool to just like have, you know, my little hometown kick ass in these blind tastings. In terms of stories that are fit for public consumption, I will tell you one. This was actually kind of funny. And I feel bad telling it, but that's okay. It was his fault. So Damon Hewitt, who was backup quarterback with us in New England, and now has Passing Time Winery in that here. They're making some killer juice from the Horse Heaven Hills, from Red Mountain, from Walla Walla. They're really making great wine, which is nice because, just as a quick digression, for a long time, athlete wines were like not taken seriously, and they shouldn't have been. There were a lot of athletes that got into the wine business, and they would just assign their name to somebody's third or fourth label, and it was shitty wine, and they just, you know, would do it. But thankfully now they're, you know, Rick Meyer and Napa, and Damon and Dan with Passing Time. You know, there are a lot of guys that are actually really serious about making great juice. So I'm going to say that nicely about Damon, and then I'm going to just bury him. So we're sitting there, so we're at the house, and we're sitting outside on the deck, and Teddy Bruschi is just kind of making fun of us for being wine dorks, you know, and mostly Damon, because Damon was just, I just really like wine, and Damon wanted to tell you everything about it. We all know these wine people that want to tell you everything about every wine you've ever had. They're just so annoying, and they just deserve to be made fun of. And so we had a couple of bottles open, and Bruschi goes into the kitchen, and he comes back out with 4 glasses. He puts 2 in front of me, and he puts 2 in front of Damon. And he goes, all right, you guys don't know what these are. I want you to try these 2 wines. I want you to tell me about them. And so I'm there, and I'm trying this wine, and I'm trying this wine, and Damon jumps in and it's like, well, this one obviously is a very young wine that's going to really mature nicely as it ages.
You have a great Damon.
Now this wine is coming into its own nicely. This is probably, you know, left bank, like he's just being like just a dork. And so as I'm watching this, it's like, you know, when you see a car crash happening and you know it's going to happen and you can't stop it, right? Bruschi comes to me and goes, Drew, what do you think? I go, Teddy, you poured us 2 glasses of the same wine. He goes, that's exactly what I did. Damon, you're a tool. He had just gone on like for 5 minutes about the differences between these 2 wines, and it was exactly the same wine. And anyway, so let's see what else. Yeah, that's enough for now. I think if I go deeper to that with it, it'll be bad.
David really is hilarious, for the record, and Chris, their winemaker's making some great wines. So
yeah, they're making great wine. It truly is great to, you know, like Charles Woodson's making serious wine. You know, Damon and Dan are making serious wine. Rick Meyer is making great wine. Dwayne Wade's actually making serious. I haven't tried it yet, but apparently he's making real wine. So a lot of these athletes now that are getting into wine are really serious about it, rather than just. There were some of my contemporaries that actually kind of made me mad because they were just putting like really famous names on bad bottles of wine. I'm like, no, you don't need to do that. You're on this level, you know, assign your name to something that's really, really good. So I'm really happy to say that the athletes that are getting into wine now are taking it seriously. None of them are as good as Doubleback because they don't have Josh, but they are at least serious about making great juice.
But it is you know, in all honesty, one of the things that drew me into Doubleback was, you know, I was at Leonetti, the Young Wine Geek, when Drew started Doubleback, and my initial reaction was, great, you know, another mediocre project by a celebrity athlete that, you know, the world needs. But Drew did it. You know, I know a few of you have heard me tell this story, but you know, Drew did it the exact right way that you should start a wine project. He bought a piece of property, developed that property, and he built a business based on the success of the wine quality. And that's been really gravitating for me, and a lot of cool authenticity there for Doubleback. So hats off to I don't want to give him a big head though. Anyways.
Already got a big head.
There's a good story about that.
Yeah.
Any other questions that you guys have for
Drew,
us?
Drew,
Yeah,
I have a suggestion for how you keep from drinking your good wines. I keep my vertical of your wine in a different state.
That's actually very responsible, Leo. I like that. I like that. No, that's
The vertical is in Rhode Island and I live in Virginia.
oh, there you go. No, that's fantastic. That's a good. We've done that. We have a cellar up in Montana, and a lot of the stuff that I need to hide from myself lives in Montana while we live in Oregon.
Yeah.
You got to be careful that when you're away from your cellar. I had an incident where our thermostat broke, and
Ooh,
we had a little
ouch.
we had a little and very expensive problem.
The cellar is underground.
Yes, there you go. That's the right way to do it. Well, oh, wait, hold on. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
How many bottles in my personal cellar? Well, less than there were before the start of the quarantine. We actually we're getting ready to move, and I had a guy come in and do the inventory on the cellar in Bend. There's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 750-ish bottles there, and then another 1,500-ish in Montana. But I can't verify that because the depletions have been fairly significant in the last 3 months. And the other one, can we store or hide your wine from you? We can. We can put your wine in the library and hide it from you for a small fee.
What is
Okay, this is a good question. I want Josh to answer this also.
No.
Favorite non-doubleback in the cellar. So I've said for a long time that if I had to drink one wine forever, one region, I would drink nicely aged Barolo. In my personal experience, those have been the epiphany wines for me. And so we've got, still have some large formats of some 2008 Vietti Barolo that are downstairs. And when those wines come out, I'm not by nature very selfish, but when we open those, I'm very, very careful about who gets to pour it. Nobody else gets to touch the bottle because you're not going to go give yourself a heavy-handed pour of a 2008 Vietti Barolo, and I'm going to drink most of it myself, maybe with a straw. So I love those. I love those wines. We did have an experience recently when the team gets together. We have an excuse to open some really fancy stuff because it's educational. But Josh brought this bottle of Cornas when we had our last get together down in Bend. That was sort of an epiphany wine for me. Just like the depth and layers and different flavors that you found in that wine was just so. That's what we're aspiring to with Bledsoe McDaniels Syrah. We're trying to make something that rivals Cornas.
Yeah, I'd have to go. I'm a huge homer in the way that I drink a lot of French wine. Left Bank Bordeaux just really kills it for me. And kind of the wine in the cellar, I think, would be Ponte Canet. It's a second growth Bordeaux wine that I just, I can't afford first growth, for the record.
Stop negotiating, Josh.
Ponte Canet is a first growth, regardless of what they say.
It's just an absolutely incredible wine. So it's been, in a lot of ways, it's been the archetype for Doubleback over the last maybe 4 or 5 years. That's kind of where we got the concrete aging idea. And then also I'd say the Northern Run. I'm a huge fan of Jean-Louis Chave in Hermitage, and he's got some, if anyone's a fan of him too, he's got some really cool new Saint Joseph projects going on, which are pretty affordable in the kind of the $60 price point. But if I could drink Chave Hermitage every day, I'd be a pretty happy camper. So I'd go that direction. You can pop that open.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate it. Appreciate it. We had a great time in all 3 spots in New England, in Buffalo, and Dallas. We loved it. It was a cool experience. We had, we had just, got to play NFL football. Come on, it's like most young boys' childhood dream, and I got to do that and do it in 3 cities. And, no, it's really, really cool. I don't think I could be bigger. Oh, now that you've tried the wine, you're a bigger fan. I like that. You know what? So plans for the near future with our winery. You know, we want to continue to grow, but you also, when you're in business, and many of you probably can recognize this, there's a tendency to just grow for the sake of growth, and we don't want to fall into that trap. We want to continue to enjoy what we do. We're really passionate about it as a team. I am, Josh is, the whole team is. My wife's passionate about what we get to do. And if you just grow for the sake of getting bigger, you can take some of the passion out of it. But we are very huge believers in the Walla Walla Valley. And so we are acquiring more property in the Walla Walla Valley. But as we're doing that, we're not just going to just blow up and start making 100,000 cases of wine that we don't care about. We're going to make as much wine as these guys can make great, and as much wine as people will buy from us. We're not going to get into a situation where we're just going to make a bunch of wine and try to push it out through distribution. That's not the reason we got into the business. So we're going to continue to grow slowly and methodically and with great thought. And we have some other ideas that we can share with you in the future, but right now we're going to stick to what we know best, which is you know, making great Walla Walla Valley wine and really enjoying it. It's just you know, thank you guys for being customers. That's been one thing that's been it's been prevalent and something that's permeated through our whole business as we've gone through this crazy time we've gone through. We're so appreciative we get to do this, and these guys work their tails off to make great wine for you guys, and we love being in the business, but we don't get to do it unless you guys buy wine from us. And so we really, really appreciate you guys, and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Drew.
Wine.
These have been really excellent. I've attended all 3 of these online ones, and they've been a lot of fun, and we've learned a lot, particularly about your wines. And for us who can't get out to Walla Walla very frequently, it would be really nice to be able to do these once or twice a year once the COVID-19 thing goes away. So if you would put that in your kind of in your thought process, it would really help us that can't get out to Walla Walla very frequently.
Amen. It's there's a lot of things that have come out of this thing. There's some positives that have come out of this thing, and that's one of them. This will become very much a part of our program going forward. First of all, we like it. You know, we get to sit here. It's an excuse to crack some good wine and talk, and we don't have to get on an airplane to do it. So yeah, no, this is we're definitely going to keep doing this.
Great.
Well, generally, we don't have to get on an airplane. Today, we had a good friend that picked us up on his airplane. We went out on the tarmac and stuck our thumbs in the air, and we got a ride. But in general, you know, we can do it from wherever we are, and so yeah, no, it's going to be it's definitely going to become very much a part of our ongoing program, and we'll try to see if we can. I don't know. We're still figuring it out, but we'll try and see if we can make it new and interesting each time, and do some different stuff, and I don't know, have fun with it because we enjoy it. You know, we didn't get into this business because we felt like it was work. We got into it because we really like it, and just love sharing it with you guys.
And it's really cool to be able to reach so many different people across the country in one foul swoop, and you know, people that, you know, we get to do a lot of West Coast and East Coast dinners, but some of the, you know, states that we don't get to very often. It's been really cool to connect with new customers that have done so much to support us, but also, you know, it's not easy for us to go see you, and it's been fun to connect. So we appreciate that.
Cheers.
And with that, guys, I just want to tell you guys thanks again. Thanks for joining us, and we're gonna go have some dinner up on the patio and enjoy the sunset.
Wonderful.
And
Thanks for taking
buy
the
the
time.
purple powder. I don't know where you buy the purple powder. I really don't. You need a friend in the FBI. Purple powder.
Cheers.
Hey, Josh, what's the best prank that you pulled on Drew?
Well, there's that'll be a different story, Tom. We'll have to.
And we see you in Walla Walla.
We'll see you in Walla Walla. We'll figure it out.
Hey, I'm still the boss around here. You know.
He's still pretty big, Tom. So.
Yeah, don't poke the bear. Time.
I gotta lift a little more.
Cheers, guys. Thank you so
Cheers,
much.
all.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How do I end it?
Cheers. Thank you. Very much enjoyed it.
Leave.
You said that could leave.
Oh, there we go.